So thank you, Jeremy and everyone. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Mike Knowlton, and I'm with a company called Campfire. And what I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit about kind of our approach towards creating immersive experiences. I'm going to take you through a couple case studies of our work, and then kind of leave and share some lessons that we've learned along the way. And I'll try to speak slowly here. Usually when I'm talking, I can kind of go pretty quickly, so I'll try to speak slowly. So to tell you a little bit about Campfire, Campfire was founded about 11 years ago by a small team of indie filmmakers. So the kind of pedigree of our company is based in indie film. The founders of Campfire were part of the team that made the Blair Witch Project, which, if you're familiar with the marketing behind that film, it was a real sort of one of the first films that had a marketing campaign behind it that really pulled in fans into the story world and kind of created a participatory experience in that. So the kind of DNA of that project is really in every project that Campfire does. So the work that we do really is around kind of creating these award-winning strategies to help launch new entertainment franchises and products. So a lot of the clients that we work with are leading entertainment companies in the US, companies like HBO, Netflix, Amazon, and then we also work directly with brands. And the work that we do is really around creating participatory programs, interactive narratives, and immersive experiences. And our clients hire us because that work generates earned media and ignites fan cultures and drives awareness. So we'll be brought in for a new show that's about to launch because our clients want us to create a campaign that's going to drive buzz around that property and get fans really excited about it. These are some of the projects that we've worked on. I've pulled basically our more entertainment-focused clients because of the conference. We've also worked directly with brands like Harley-Davidson, the auto manufacturer Infinity, Verizon, Snapple as well. But in terms of entertainment clients, like I said, a lot of our work is with HBO. We've had an 8-year relationship with HBO, and we help them launch basically all of their tentpole shows, starting with True Blood. We helped them launch Thrones, and most recently Westworld. We've also worked with Amazon, Disney, really a nice wide range of properties. Some really exciting news for Campfire is that in January, we joined a company called The Mill. The Mill is a visual effects and post-production company that also has an emerging tech team. So the really exciting thing for us at Campfire is now we're seated and connected with a group of animators and visual effects professionals that allows us to really create to continue to create the award-winning work that we do, and we can sit and work with the creators themselves so close. The Mill is part of the Technicolor family, headquartered in London, and we have offices in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and now in Bangalore. The Mill probably is best known for its work on Gladiator 20 years ago, where it won an Academy Award for the visual effects. But as I mentioned, the Mill now has a really great emerging technology team, and at Campfire, we sit with them. So in addition to the Mill's traditional offering of color and visual effects, now within the emerging tech side, we're working on augmented reality, experiential design, VR, and gaming. If anyone has seen the Facebook augmented reality effects for like Ready Player One, Game of Thrones, Jurassic World, that work is work that came out of the Mill in the emerging tech team. Last week, we also announced at the Mill that we're partners with Magic Leap in their early access developer program. So that partnership is really exciting to us because it's going to allow us to continue to explore what's possible in spatial computing. Having said all that about kind of emerging tech You know, I want to talk about, before I dive into the case studies, I'd like to talk about kind of 3 core foundations that inform all the projects that we do. The first is the idea that immersion is not a property of technology. When you're creating immersive experiences, that idea of immersion is about sort of a deep connection with a story, focus, kind of feeling like you're in the world and that you're enveloped in that. And yes, having virtual reality goggles on your face helps you experience that, but creating immersion is really more about good storytelling, good writing, and great experience design. Yes, we use technology like augmented reality and virtual reality to help us create immersive experiences, but the technology is a tool that serves the story that we're telling. The second idea I'd like to talk about that is a foundation in our work is a deep understanding of fan cultures and fan behaviors. I mentioned that a lot of our clients hire us because they want the work that we do generates earned media and brings awareness for their new entertainment franchises. So in order for us to do that, we need to have a deep understanding of fan behaviors. So we developed this rubric over 10 years of creating work. We call it skimmers, dippers, and divers. And this is a kind of a model for how audiences interact with a property. And it's important to create experiences for all those different types of audience members. So you've got divers down at the bottom. The divers are basically your super fans. They're the types of fans that go to the comic conferences. They're the ones that know all the names of the characters. They're the ones that are just deeply knowledgeable about a story that you're telling. They have the highest level of engagement. At the top, you have skimmers. Skimmers are maybe more the general public. Skimmers might have a passing awareness of a franchise. They may know a few of the characters' names. They might have even seen 1 or 2 of the episodes. The idea here is that they're they have a much lower engagement with a property. The dippers, that middle layer, this is a really interesting area because this is the social layer. This is where kind of conversations are happening on social media. And this is where an entertainment franchise can start to develop social proof. Dippers love to watch divers, the activities of divers. So sort of a common scenario is the divers. Maybe you create an experience for divers at a Comic-Con or a fan convention. It gets posted, an article gets written about it, and it gets posted on social media. And then the dippers take that and really get into it and share that. So that conversation on social media is where social proof starts to develop. So then the larger publications start to write about it, and that touches the skimmers. So this idea of skimmers, dippers, and divers is a really fundamental component of our work. And in our projects, we try to develop experiences for each level of engagement in a fan community. The last kind of core component of our work that is the foundation is an understanding of sharing. One of the challenges with virtual reality is the fact that those experiences are often solitary. We haven't quite yet solved the larger kind of how do we make VR social. So in our work, we're always trying to create content that is made for social media, that's made to spread. And the way that you do that is not I've been in so many meetings where people are like, oh, let's make something that's funny or cool because it's going to spread on social media. And the reality is that, yeah, it sure helps if it's funny or cool, but that's not why something spreads. Because you placed the like button in a certain area isn't why something spreads. People share content for deep psychological reasons. And these 3 ideas are taken from a book called Spreadable Media, which was published by the MIT Media Lab. So we really, like to kind of dig into the psychological reasons for why people share. The first one is to give me stats. This is a pretty basic thing, but you kind of understand that if I'm, let's say, really into sneakers, like high-end sneakers and I get an invite to a pop-up store, I'm going to post that on social media to elevate my status in the sneakerheads community, right? The second one is to define our collective identity. So the idea with this is that this is about sharing more as to plant a flag in the ground and say, I believe in this, or I associate myself with this concept. It's not so much about changing other people's minds or bringing other people towards your community. We're seeing this a lot in the political climate right now in America. But this is, the second one is a really interesting one because it's really more about defining your collective identity and planting a flag and associating yourself with something. And the last is basically this idea of strengthening our bond. This is more of a one-to-one connection, often done via SMS, Facebook Messenger, or even email. And this is going to be where I find a piece of content, I know that you're really into a certain TV show or band, and I'm going to send that to you. So these three ideas, the kind of ideas that immersion is not a property of technology, the understanding of fan communities, and really thinking deeply about the psychological reasons for why people share, are fundamental to all the work that we do. So I'm going to take you through two case studies of our work. These are both some pretty recent projects that we finished. I mentioned that we do a lot of work for HBO. We've been working with them for 8 years, and it's a really great relationship. Typically, the way that we start working with HBO is they'll come to us before a show premieres, maybe a year and a half out. And they'll engage us in an audience strategy phase of work. And that's where we will work with HBO to sort of help them define a target, not just a target audience for the show, but also an understanding of adjacent audiences, so that then we can build bridges to those audiences in the campaigns that we develop. And the idea and the rationale behind that is by building those bridges, we can make that audience larger and drive that buzz for the show. So we started with HBO on a Westworld Strategy engagement and developed some ideas and strategies about how to kind of connect to potential audience for Westworld. The HBO team then went off and started to create its marketing campaign. They worked with their key art vendors. They developed the design of the out-of-home ads. And their tech team in Seattle also at the time was very interested in working on their first virtual reality piece. And they figured that the showrunners thought that Westworld would be the perfect story world for that. So the team in Seattle developed a 15-minute virtual reality experience for the HTC Vive. And it was powered by a $15,000 computer, and it took 15 minutes, so you couldn't really get a lot of throughput, a lot of fans through. And they came to us and said, can you help us figure out the best way to roll this out? So our strategy basically was to create an activation at San Francisco's TechCrunch conference and New York Comic-Con. We chose TechCrunch in San Francisco because it was it's a conference that's focused on technology, and we identified that tech community as a potential target for the larger fan base for Westworld. So that was a good way for us to reach and engage fans that were techies, that were in the tech world. So the idea here was that we, on the conference floor, fans would come up, they would interact with a host. We cast hosts and created a dialogue and interaction with fans that they were actually talking to hosts from the series. They were given an appointment, and then about a quarter of a mile away from the convention center, they would go to a gallery where they would actually visit the Delos Corporation. Delos is the corporation that runs Westworld in the Westworld show. So when you went to the gallery, you were actually going to the Westworld corporate offices because you were about to go to Westworld. So I'm going to play a video that kind of walks you through that experience right now.
Have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
HBO's Westworld is set in a futuristic theme park where the virtual meets the physical. leaving visitors unsure of where the fantasy ends and reality begins.
Are you real?
Well, if you can't tell, does it matter?
This provided the inspiration for an enhanced virtual reality experience, one where the story began long before guests put on their headset. We started by building realistic outposts of the fictional Delos Corporation at both TechCrunch Disrupt and the New York Comic-Con, designed to immerse guests into the story world instantly.
Welcome to Westworld.
Greeted by immaculately dressed hosts, guests came to realize all was not as it seemed, and that these represented artificially intelligent machines. With carefully scripted performances that echoed specific scenes from the show, our live hosts literally opened the door to an immersive VR experience developed by HBO Interactive and powered by the HTC Vive. Transported to the Westworld Park, guests met with a seductive host who matched their personal taste. Then, they strapped on six-shooters to test their aim before the darker, hidden side of the world emerged in a series of terrifying twists.
We're gonna have to recode this entire module from scratch.
By blurring the line between the physical and the virtual, the Westworld experience seamlessly transported fans to the show's story world, evolving what a destination VR experience can deliver. So much so that our guests didn't talk about experiencing a simulation. They talked about actually going to Westworld.
That's a really, the fact that fans were saying, I'm going to Westworld or I went to Westworld was a big win for us. And that was basically a sign of success that activation had worked, because they weren't talking about, oh, I did the Westworld VR thing. They said, I actually went to Westworld. So that then evolved into the next iteration of the Westworld experience. I don't have a video for that, but I'll walk you through some photographs of that. At Campfire, we find ourselves increasingly working more directly with the writers of these shows, which is really exciting for us, because that means that sort of goal for marketers to create advertising that doesn't feel like advertising is that much closer for us. And this is a great example, because the showrunners of Westworld saw what we did for season 1, and they were really jazzed and really excited about the kind of, I'd say, the non-VR aspects of it, which was basically the fans interacting with the hosts and feeling that personal relationship. And so that led for us to develop this second experience to bridge, to kind of get fans to continue their excitement about Westworld and to start to build up some excitement for season 2. So we developed a 30-minute immersive theater experience for Westworld based off of what we learned from that first project that I showed you. This basically, we took 6 people at a time at San Diego and New York Comic-Con through a 30-minute experience. Now, 6 people every half hour when you're talking about a Comic-Con activation is not a lot of people. But we did that intentionally, because when you go to these conferences, it's always really crowded and it's hot, and you never really have deep, long experiences. You have a lot of experiences that I would say are more shallow. So when you're, so a lot of times these activations at San Diego Comic-Con are about getting numbers through. So when we were creating this, we were almost intentionally counter-programming that. We wanted to create an experience that was radically different than what fans were having at most of the other activations. So this was a 30-minute experience that was a half-mile away from the convention center. Fans would get an appointment time. They would arrive at the location. They were greeted by, again, hosts. We had carefully scripted lines that the actors would use, but there was also always this kind of improvisational performance that was opened for them. Fans were welcomed into a kind of waiting area, but this wasn't positioned as, here's some costumes from the show. This was positioned as, you're about to go to Westworld. Which suit are you going to pick? Which weapon do you want to pick? So that fans were actually being kind of pulled into this experience. So one by one, then fans were taken into what was called Concierge Analytics. And so this was basically a room where they would have a one-on-one conversation with a profiler. The profiler was an actor experienced in immersive theater that was giving you a cold read. So they would ask you questions, and they were very provocative, unsettling questions. They would ask the fan questions, and through the answers that the fan gave them, they were slowly able to give them a personality assessment, which is weird, and people loved it. At the end of that interview and that interrogation, fans were given either a white or black hat based upon their personality assessment. These were not cheap hats. These were really high quality Western hats, and fans loved them. You could see them walking around San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con wearing them. After the experience in that one-on-one room, they were taken into a full replica of the Mariposa Saloon. They were greeted by Delos beverage head Paul McGee, who's a world-renowned mixologist who had created 3 cocktails that were kind of from the world of Westworld that had a story around each of them. There was a saloon girl that was kind of similar to Tandy Newton's character, the player piano in the background playing those amazing kind of piano covers of songs from Radiohead. Kind of the long and short of it was, fans really loved it, and it became one of the hottest tickets at Comic-Con because of the fact that it was this deep, personal, one-on-one experience. Now, I'm going to take you through another case study. This is a project that we did for Amazon for their Man in the High Castle series. Man in the High Castle is based off of a Philip K. Dick novel which presents an alternate history in the United States where the Axis powers won World War II. So the German Reich rules the East Coast in America, and the Japanese Pacific states rule the West Coast. And in the middle is the neutral zone. Now, Man in the High Castle was Amazon's most popular one-hour drama, but season 1 had some challenges, and just generally the kind of overall imagery, visual imagery of Man in the High Castle is very challenging with all the Nazi imagery. So that was a real kind of tough challenge to work with. Also, the show actually takes place in 1962. It doesn't take place in World War II. And people really thought that this was a World War II show, but it wasn't. So we created, so that was sort of what we were, the kind of world that we were working with. And the challenge for us was basically to build up enthusiasm for season 2 and to create a content program that bridged season 2 and season 3. So we created a program called Resistance Radio, and I'll play that case study for you now.
Calling America. Are you out there? Alone? Waiting for someone to come along and illuminate your way? Trust me, you are not the only ones.
The Amazon original series, The Man in the High Castle, is set in an alternate 1962, one where the Axis powers won the war. To draw and engage new audiences to the show, we created Resistance Radio, a pirate radio network broadcasting subversive music and messages of rebellion from an America where dissent is a death sentence. Resistance Radio features 3 scripted shows, each with its own DJ host, providing a dramatic glimpse of life in the greater Nazi Reich and Japanese Pacific states. For our music, we partnered with Danger Mouse, Sam Cohen, and a roster of top artists to record a playlist of 18 new songs. At launch, we smuggled 7-inch propaganda singles to influential conspirators.
Holy crap, this is so freaking cool!
Unveiled an installation and concert at South by Southwest,
and when push comes
and streamed one of the first Facebook Live audio initiatives.
The reality is we handed our country to a Nazi madman, and threw practically everything good we ever stood for out the window.
The show immediately grabbed the headlines, engaging our target in a wide-ranging debate about the meaning of freedom and authoritarianism in today's America. And the response to Resistance Radio was overwhelmingly positive, culminating in the release of a companion soundtrack album and the pirate radio concept being written into the show itself.
What kind of music is this?
It's pirate radio from the neutral zone. A little reminder of what we're fighting for.
Unlike any music I've ever heard.
So that's an example that we're really proud of, because the idea that was developed for a marketing campaign actually made itself into show canon and will be playing a pretty serious role in season 3, which is very exciting. I wanted to leave you with basically 4 principles for immersion, and these are some lessons learned that we've learned over the 10 years of our work, and thought it'd be valuable to share with you. So the first is something that sounds pretty simple, but is actually really, really hard. It's this idea of designing for participation. You know, we all carry these amazing computers in our pocket, and we're used to being on it all the time, dipping in and out of media. So when you're creating experiences, you need to understand that that's your users. They're used to participation. They expect it, and you need to design that into your projects. So sometimes that means you need to kind of rethink your story structure to accommodate that. We like to think of, when we're writing interactive narratives, we like to use the analogy that it's much more like being a jazz musician, where there may be an arc, there's a beginning and a middle and an end to the experience, but the way that the users kind of flow is a little bit more like jazz. There's kind of sections for improvisation. So that's a helpful metaphor for us to use. The second is to use natural interfaces to reduce barriers. Any time that a user is given something that's like, okay, now it's time to choose, or they're just very aware that they're stepping out of the story because they're choosing something. So we like to use things like artificial intelligence or natural language, or maybe even kind of following your eyes to track what you're interested in, to then change the content that we're giving you. So it's this idea of using natural interfaces because you don't want to break that immersion. The third is this concept of think like a forger. Forgers copy art, right? They copy the classics, but they do more than just copy art. Good forgers create a replica, but they also use the pigments that they use for the colors of their copy are using pigments from the time of the original. Or maybe the wood that they use in the canvas around it is aged from that time that original piece was made. It's this idea that every detail matters if you want to create an immersive experience. And then the fourth that I'd like to leave you with is this idea that every touch point is an opportunity for world building. What we mean by that is that, you know, the first time that your user or your fan interacts with you, that's an opportunity to start world building and to start kind of that immersive process. So even if it's about ticketing or if it's about signing up for the experience, use that to help build your world, because that'll make it a stronger, more personal experience. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. Any questions? In the back.
Hi, thank you. That was very brilliant. I wanted to ask maybe a very naive question, but fans are very hard people to please, and you know, as especially the divers. So as much as you want to reach them, they're always afraid of the marketing man, you know, coming at them. So how do you get your input? How do you get in touch with your fans? Are you a fan yourself? How do you go about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's like, how do you create a campaign that doesn't feel like marketing, right? So so I think there's 2 ways that you do that, right? The first is by becoming a fan of the show itself. And so you're actually creating a campaign from the fan perspective, as opposed to, I'm hired to create the advertising for this thing. That's also hard to do, because sometimes you may get a property that's in a genre that you're not really into. You know, I don't know, maybe I'm not really into horror, but we've got this great horror opportunity, so it's hard for me to think like that. So the second way that we do it is we will look at places where fans congregate. So for instance, we'll look at Reddit, and we'll look at the threads on Reddit about a certain property. We'll print them out, literally, we'll print them out in a printer, and then we'll cut the comments out. And then we'll start to put the comments in piles of similar ideas. So for instance, when we were working with HBO on Game of Thrones, we wanted to understand what the fans were thinking about. The fans of the book were thinking about the new series, right? So we started to realize that there were some common themes. Oh my God, you know, are they going to be too, you know, are they going to show the dragons? Or there were just certain common themes from Games of Thrones that we started to recognize by doing that. And then that way we started to understand what true fans were thinking, so that then that thinking could inform our campaign. Any other questions? Yes.
You seem to work with really large franchises most of the time, which is excellent, and like, good job getting on those bandwagons. For smaller groups, I imagine most of us don't represent Disney or Amazon or the larger kinds. When you're working with a smaller budget and smaller sort of reach and, you know, fewer star power influencers, do you have any advice for how to do similar kinds of things on a lower budget or a sort of a smaller scale?
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting because a lot of the folks that are at Campfire come from indie creator backgrounds, so we're used to, I mean, I ran a studio called Murmur for 5 years, and we were working with, you know, so we were working with, you know, not the HBOs of the world, so we kind of come from that background too. You know, I think like this idea of understanding that you're going to have different experience levels in the skimmers, dippers, and divers, that approach works whether it's Disney or whether it's an indie creator. One thing that I've also learned in the work that I've done prior to Campfire, when I'm rolling out a project, if I can couch the project in terms that aren't just marketing my show, my idea, that can work very well. So for instance, an example of that would be a project that I worked on very early on was a film that was integrated into the Facebook API. Now, when I was releasing it, I wanted to promote the piece because, of course, I wanted more people to see it, right? But I led with the idea that it was a social film. Like I called it something that wasn't the project itself, so that then the press could write about this idea. Oh, what's a social film? Oh, maybe it's this new way that entertainment's going to, you know, evolve on Facebook. It didn't end up happening like that at all. But from a kind of PR perspective, they were able to really understand it, and it wasn't just like a promotion for my thing. You know what I mean? So I think maybe, you know, if you can think like that, that might be a helpful way. Question in the back.
Have you seen any examples of stories that either you've worked on or you've seen other people work on using this sort of strategy that aren't fiction, like documentary narratives?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, a lot of the interactive documentaries that are out there, you know, the work that Upion does, for instance, their projects are great. The work that's featured at like Tribeca, the kind of, it used to be called Tribeca Interactive, now it's the immersive section, but there's in the US, it's actually, there used to be much more funding for nonfiction storytelling in that space. So there's a lot of projects like that, like Bear 71, for example, you know, is a nonfiction piece that kind of follows this approach. Any other questions? Oh. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Merci, Mike.